Welcome to Sino Warfare with Ralph D. Sawyer. Sun Bean, who was active in the 4th century BC and reputedly one of Sun-tzu's lineal descendants, overcame personal tragedy to become a key strategic advisor in the eastern state of Qi, just as the scope of warfare was dramatically escalating. His lengthy biography in the Shiji, where it's appended to that of his famous ancestor Sun-tzu, indicates Pang Juan, a fearful rival, early on contrived to have him suffer debilitating corporal punishment while he was still in the state of Wei. However, Sun Bean not only managed to survive, but escaped, and ultimately gained a measure of revenge by directing efforts in Qi that twice thwarted Wei's martial ambitions in famous early clashes. The first resulted in a decisive victory at Guiling in 353 BC. The second at Maling in 341, when he tricked the overconfident Pang Juan into believing Qi's cowardly forces were deserting. After being lured into Maling's constricted valley, Wei's 100,000-man army was annihilated by withering crossbow fire. Pang Juan committed suicide, completing Sun Bean's quest for vengeance. Although the title of Sun Bean's book, Bing Fa, is identical to Sun-tzu's, and therefore equally the art of war as conventionally translated, Bing Fa literally means military methods or tactics. I use military methods as the title for my translation to distinguish it from his ancestor's work, Sun-tzu, Art of War. The present book was arduously reconstructed from a heavily damaged pile of bamboo strips that were found in a tomb excavated in 1985. The first 15 chapters generally take the form of a dialogue between Sun Bean and either the king of Wei or Tianji, while the second 15 are expository in nature. This has prompted the belief that the first half is something of a verbatim record, and the second half a more polished compilation created by his disciples. Since the concepts and principles essentially cohere, we'll treat it as a unitary work. Now, despite the growing prominence of Sun-tzu's Art of War in the Warring States period, a fragment in the Military Methods even states, anyone who knows the Tao of the Sun family will certainly unite with heaven and earth. And also the Art of War's presumed utilization by the Sun clan, or a closed school of thought. Sun Bean's own book inexplicably disappeared by the Han Dynasty. Furthermore, despite fervent interest when the tomb text was initially discovered, it has again slipped into obscurity. This is puzzling because even if we're simply an explication of his ancestors' work, it would still merit significant attention. But it's far more than that. While it visibly continues the thrust of Sun-tzu's thought and is largely based upon it, the Military Methods introduces new ideas and different perspectives, as well as offers numerous methods for tactically realizing Sun-tzu's concepts and implementing his abstract principles. The book's fragmentary nature makes understanding and translating it difficult. Everyone who has studied has enormously benefited from the work of numerous dedicated scholars. However, I've interpreted some of the more enigmatic sentences rather differently than they have, generally in accord with similar passages found in the other classic Warring States military writings, especially the Six Secret Teachings, which was probably composed about the same time. As my translation has been academically well reviewed as well as praised by the late John Keegan, you might find it useful to consult the detailed historical introduction and copious notes on the text. So here we'll confine our discussion to the most important concepts and introduce selected but limited portions of the text. In order to avoid tedious repetition, I'll assume some familiarity with our earlier Art of War talks. Now, battles of annihilation were becoming more common by Sun Bean's era. He therefore similarly deemed success in warfare vital to the state's survival. He says, victory in warfare preserves vanquished states and continues severed generations. Not being victorious in warfare diminishes territory and endangers the altars of state. He therefore similarly concluded, military affairs must be investigated. And he stated, move only after every aspect has been prepared. However, in consonance with other warring states thinkers, Swinburne was convinced the tendency to violence was innate. He says, being endowed with teeth and horns, having claws at the front and spurs behind, coming together when happy but fighting when angry, this is the Tao of heaven. It cannot be stopped. Now, being inescapable, even the legendary sage rulers not only had to struggle to repress evildoers, they were compelled to create the very means to wage war. Those who lacked heavenly weapons provided them themselves. This was an affair of extraordinary men. In other words, people can't pretend warfare doesn't exist or that they won't suffer an onslaught. At the same time, Swinburne deemed the increasingly ballyhooed view that virtue and righteousness are sufficient for peace and survival erroneous. He said there are people whose virtue is unlike that of the 5 emperors, whose ability doesn't reach that of the 3 kings, nor their wisdom match that of the Duke of Zhou. Yet, they say, I want to accumulate benevolence and righteousness, practice the rites and music, and wear flowing robes, and thereby prevent conflict and seizure. It's not that the great sage rulers Yao and Xun didn't want this, but they couldn't attain it. Therefore, they mobilized the military to constrain the evil. Nevertheless, living in an age in which rulers envisioned conquest to be the prime means to enrich the state and achieve dominance over the realm, Swinburne felt obliged to warn against becoming enthralled with warfare, much like the Sima Fa. He says, one who takes pleasure in the military will perish. One who finds profit in victory will be insulted. The military is not something to take pleasure in. Victory, not something to profit from. Since he felt numerous battles debilitate a state, combat must be swift and aggressive, well planned and expertly executed when undertaken. However, over the nearly 2 centuries between the art of war and the military methods, people had come to realize the importance of prosperity. States therefore sought to implement measures that would foster the economy, and rulers gave lip service to the concept of the people's welfare, in the belief that a healthy, contented populace would fight more vigorously. This translated into Swinburne's advocacy of enriching the state. After that, the army can be strengthened, something everyone wanted to do. The military methods clearly shows a thorough mastery of the art of war's concepts and tactical principles, but Swinburne doesn't slavishly copy them. For example, although the tactics he proposes require thorough knowledge of the enemy, and he advises probing them to acquire the necessary information, the importance of knowing the enemy and yourself isn't emphasized, unlike in Sun-tzu. Similarly, while tactical plans depend upon the comparative power of the 2 belligerents, he doesn't discuss how to determine relative strength or offer any detailed thoughts on intelligence analysis or spycraft. Furthermore, although military campaigns require thorough preparation and a comprehensive plan, and Sun-tzu emphasized the advantages offered by the strategic defensive, Swinburne advocates aggressively exploiting weakness in the enemy in almost all situations. When none can be discerned, or the enemy enjoys a numerical superiority or positional advantage, the army must first direct its efforts to fostering disorder and creating gaps and exploitable deficiencies. Nevertheless, the methods are essentially the same as advanced in the art of war, including being deceptive. Thus, Swinburne states, deception is the way to put the enemy into difficulty. Now, for example, to shatter their confidence and induce doubt, physical ploys can be used. For example, spread your pennants out and make your flags conspicuous to cause doubt in the enemy. Or cleverly positioned fences and screens to bedazzle the enemy and make them doubtful. When facing a formidable foe, he suggests, announce you do not dare fight. Show them you are incapable. Sit about submissively to make their thoughts arrogant and thus seemingly accord with their ambitions. Other methods are best suited to drawing the enemy into combat. For example, deliberate tactical errors and minor losses are the means to bait the enemy. Hidden plans and concealed deceptions are the means to inveigle the enemy into combat. Perhaps most interesting of all in the context of Sun-tzu's enigmatic pronouncement that we discussed earlier, create disorder and take them. When confronting an inferior enemy who continues to be reluctant to fight, Sun-tzu advises, disrupt your companies and disorder your ranks in order to accord with the enemy's desire. Then they will certainly engage you in battle. Deception is also valuable for enticing the enemy into movement whenever the army finds itself in a disadvantageous situation, whether to simply draw them off, destabilize and make them vulnerable to attack, or lure them onto fatal terrain where locally superior power can be brought to bear. Learning from Sun-tzu, Sun-tzu added the factor of speed for its debilitating effects. Sun-tzu says, those who excel in warfare can cause the enemy to roll up their army and race far off, to travel 2 days normal distance at a time, to be exhausted and sick but unable to rest, to be hungry and thirsty but unable to eat. An enemy emaciated in this way certainly won't be victorious. It's a straightforward application of Sun-tzu's previously discussed insight. In The Art of War, Sun-tzu states, if you abandon your armor and heavy equipment to race forward day and night without encamping, covering 2 days normal distance at a time, marching forward 100 li, about 35 miles, to contend for gain, the 3 armies' generals will be captured. The strong will be the first to arrive, while the exhausted will follow. With such tactics, only 1 in 10 will reach the battle site. Sun-tzu apparently had great confidence in this measure, for he said, if you lure them into going far off, the army will roll up their army to race there. They therefore offered 9 techniques for getting the enemy to rush about, some of which unfortunately have been lost in the damaged strips. However, the first is seizing provisions, the second water, third fords, fourth roads, fifth ravines, sixth easy terrain, ninth what they solely value. In general, these 9 seizures are the means to force the enemy to hasten about. Until this is possible, temporary fortifications can provide a means for defense. Chariots, shields, caltrops, and similar equipment can be used in difficult circumstances to construct the stockades and the barriers that are needed to survive. The army should also strive to occupy difficult terrain that can impede enemy onslaughts, including ravines, which are normally disadvantageous and may possibly become killing grounds. Thank you for watching.